Good morning everyone from Brisbane Airport, where we'll soon be flying across to Mount Isa. But instead of taking the usual 2-hour non-stop flight, today we'll be taking the 7-stop milk run flight with Rex. Check-in though was like any other flight, and we were issued with one boarding pass for the whole journey. Bag drop could be completed at these self-service machines, or anyone could also visit the service desks for help. It was at first a bit confusing as our flight isn't advertised as a Mount Isa flight. Instead, only a service to Windora, as I'm guessing that must be the furthest place people commonly travel to from here. Here's the plane which will be taking us on our 9-hour ride around Queensland. Our boarding and departure were a bit late, but we had the whole day to make it over to Mount Isa, and none of the other passengers seemed to be worried either. My seat is 9A on the single side near the back. I thought it would be quite interesting to see the sorts of people using this flight, being mostly temporary workers and residents who need to either visit Mount Isa or Brisbane for things. So for that reason, I thought it would be interesting to see what routes people were taking along our 8-flight journey. So enjoy these very amateurly made seat map graphics. The first leg of our journey would be the shortest of the whole trip, at only 82 miles. So being less than half an hour, the seatbelt sign remained on for the whole time. So we all stayed in our seats, as did the flight attendant, meaning we didn't receive any service. But nor was I expecting any, as just as we finished climbing, we started our descent into Toowoomba. In Toowoomba, the plane was shut down, but those continuing further were asked to remain on board. Those who did stay on board during our layover were given a water bottle before the other passengers boarded. With the next flight being the longest of the day, at more than double most of the other flights and taking over an hour and a half, we did see a snack and drink service. Vanessa, the lovely flight attendant, offered us both the nut snack mix and shortbread cookies along with tea, coffee and water. As we don't get the chance to move around on all these flights, let's check out the toilet while we can. The one toilet on board is located at the front of the plane. It's of a fairly rudimentary design, and the space isn't that large either, and there's no water in the tap, so it's probably best to visit the airport toilets when you have the chance. Approaching Charleville, the captain told us that visibility was quite bad and that we might not be able to land and might have to continue on to Quilpie instead.
So by the time we get there, obviously you may feel the aircraft introduced approach will climb back up, hold overhead and hopefully get a break in that weather.
But thankfully we managed to land all right as the visibility had improved. But I wonder what would have happened to the passengers leaving and boarding in Charleville if we did have to divert. The climates in some of these regional areas can all be quite different from one another, as here in Charleville it was raining. Everyone actually got off the plane here as we were refuelling, so we could spend a bit of time in the terminal before getting back on board. All the regional airports we visited today, so not Brisbane, Toowoomba or Mount Isa, are unscreened, so we can freely walk around inside and out and then board the plane again without having to clear security. Charleville is the largest airport we visit today, which only sees service from the Rex Milk Run flights. But they still have car hire services here, and a nice large waiting area with some comfy lounges, as well as a cafe which even the pilots visited. Importantly for people taking a long journey today, there were power outlets inside the terminal, which many people were making use of. After about half an hour inside, boarding was called, and we were all shown back on board our Saab to continue the journey. Upon reaching the end of the runway here and turning around to line up, we had to hold for quite a few minutes, as a flock of birds had settled on the runway and a car had to be dispatched to clear them before we could depart.
Ladies and gents, Captain speaking, just waiting for the aerodrome response officer just to come out and clear some birds off the runway ahead of the aircraft. Once he's done that, work underway. It should be another 1 or 2 minutes
but eventually we got up and climbed away from the bad weather at Charleville, proceeding onwards to Quilpie. We got another quick service on this flight, with Vanessa handing us all out some more water bottles. Let's have a bit more of a look at the Saab 340 taking us all the way over to Mount Isa. The seats are arranged in a 1-2 configuration, and we'll have a look at these later on in the day. There are also some overhead bins, but only on the right hand side of the plane, and they aren't that big either, so you'd be better off trying to fit a larger item under the seat in front, rather than overhead. We also mustn't have been flying too high on this flight, as some people were discreetly taking some phone calls as well.
So we're sure the big cleansing out descent into Quilpie. When the conditions should improve a little bit as we head west, some scattered showers at cloud base a little bit higher in Quilpie for our arrival. Should be touching down just prior to 1:45. For anyone leaving us in Quilpie, once again it's been our pleasure to have you on board. For those of you continuing on, we do have quite a little bit of freight to load, so we'll probably be on the ground for about 10 minutes while that happens before we head on to Windora.
Welcome to Quilpie. Here we'll remain on the plane as it's only a short turnaround. In these remote areas, there's slightly more unconventional ways of handling an aircraft, with this ute being used to load cargo on board. Talking about the cargo, we took on quite a lot of it here, with these services being a lifeline to small communities, as it's how most of their mail and some food and other bits and pieces are delivered. We received our 4th safety demo while on the ground here, as we'd heard it so many times already, I was nearly able to recite the whole thing. After unloading the ute, the engines were started again, and we got on our way towards another rural community.
My name's Vanessa. Today's flight is the Commando Captain James Paddington and First Officer Richard Williams.
We got some more food on this flight, although the crackers and biscuits were seeming a bit repetitive at this point, so make sure to either pack some substantial food with you or pick something else up at one of our stops if you're travelling a long way. There were some more great views of the scenery down below us through the clouds. After another short flight, we again made our approach into a different small airport, in what was feeling a bit deja vu by now. Here in Windora we were able to get off again, this time for a long break while the crew rested and had lunch. We were again free to wander in and around the airport, although you really can't go too far in a short time, as there isn't much around most of these airports, even though they're mostly pretty close to the towns they serve. As Windora is often the longer rest stop, there's a few more facilities in this terminal, with a few snacks and microwavable meals available on an honesty system. There was a more cafeteria-style waiting room here, with the crew all resting inside the Rex office here. After a long break here of nearly an hour, which most people use to stretch their legs after already spending many hours on board the small Saab 340, we got on board for the other half of our journey today. We actually didn't have to receive another safety demo on this flight, as there were no new customers on board, which made our startup and departure even faster. Some more snacks came from the small galley for this flight as well, and some more water bottles, of which I collected about 8 of them by now. On the ground here in Birdsville, we saw another familiar ute, which collected most of the parcels which were loaded on in Quilpie. Here the crew performed what's known as a hot turnaround, where the right engine was kept running as it's only a short turnaround time here and there's a lack of ground power. The scenery below us kept changing, as on this flight some more greenery could be seen below, as opposed to the desert we'd been used to for the last few hours. The seatbelt sign also stayed on for this flight, as it was another short journey. At Baduri we had another hot turnaround, as did we at our next stop as well. Aside from those boarding or leaving the plane, everyone had to remain seated. Here, even a ute wasn't used to load or unload the plane. Instead, a hand-pulled cart was in use. Combined with the short flight times and hot turnarounds on the last few legs, the seatbelt sign was left on for well over 2 hours, meaning those continuing through all those stops weren't permitted to leave their seat for an extended period. There was also no need to give a whole plane safety demo here either, or for the rest of our flights, as these 2 new passengers were all we'd had for the last few flights, and all we'd be receiving for the rest of the day, so Vanessa was able to give them a personal safety demo, as the rest of the plane was already very well informed on everything else by now. So while everyone is now becoming very well acquainted with staying in their seat, let's finally take a look around it. On the seatback there's a tray table which can't be moved around, and a decent sized pocket below that. Legroom isn't that great for taller people like myself, but most people are able to stretch out into the aisle. Storage-wise, the seat is actually quite good, as the design of the aircraft leaves a ledge on the side, which is surprisingly effective at holding a few small things as well. The downside of the seat, though, is that the armrests are uncomfortably low, and while there is a recline button, it actually can't be pressed in, and the seat doesn't recline at all. They do have comfortable leather padding, although head support is very lacking, as for almost everyone on board the seat wasn't extending past their shoulders. Thankfully there are air vents overhead, which would probably make flying this route in summer just bearable. Arriving into Boulia, our day finally started to feel like it was coming to a close. Most people who'd been on board for a while seemed kind of itchy for their long journey to finish and arrive into Mount Isa, so no one was bothered that we had another hot turnaround without leaving our seats. While the terminal building here seems to be quite substantial, and although we're now moving closer and closer to the civilization of Mount Isa, the luggage cart here is the most rudimentary of all those we've seen today, being an old, rusty, hand-pulled trolley. After another very short turnaround, the the shortest of the day at only 19 minutes, we took off for our final flight. We received the last round of drinks and snacks on this leg, with some soft drinks and alcohol also available for purchase too, for very reasonable prices. I was able to move around the cabin a little bit on this flight as the seatbelt signs finally came off, and many people on board made quick use of the toilet as it had been hours since our last opportunity to move about. But eventually I settled back into the familiar seat of 9A for our final approach and landing. Disembarking felt like a huge relief to finally be leaving the plane, but at the same time the whole journey didn't feel nearly as long or excruciating as it could have been. The crew were kind enough to let us take some great pictures of the plane, but then we made it inside to collect the only pieces of luggage which had travelled the whole way from Brisbane. Overall, that was a really fun journey, and while I wouldn't rush to take all the flights again, especially in summer, it isn't such a bad way to spend a day, although I do feel a bit sorry for the crew who have to operate the same flight in reverse the next day all the way back to Brisbane.